What I want to talk about today is something that has been sitting with me for a while now, because the more information that comes out, the more certain things start to connect in ways that are hard to ignore. There has been a lot of conversation circulating about what allegedly went on in private rooms involving Diddy, and one of the names that keeps coming up in those conversations is Ja Rule. According to people who were present at the time, Ja Rule reportedly left a room earlier than Diddy and openly told others that what was happening inside that room was, in his own words, freaky. Now, if you pause and really think about that, it raises some serious questions. If you are willing to announce to people that disturbing or inappropriate activity was taking place in a room, and you yourself were just inside that room moments earlier, while Diddy remained inside, then it naturally creates suspicion. That kind of statement does not exist in a vacuum. It leads people to ask what exactly was happening, who was involved, and why certain individuals are now behaving the way they are publicly. This is especially relevant when we look at how aggressively Ja Rule has positioned himself online in recent months as a vocal defender of Diddy, posting long statements, explanations, and repeated commentaries that go far beyond casual support. It almost feels like an overcorrection, and when someone feels the need to explain that much, people begin to wonder what they are really trying to protect or distance themselves from. What stands out to me is the timing. Ja Rule has chosen this particular moment to resurface old grievances with 50 Cent, framing them in moral language, calling out hypocrisy, and bringing up past allegations involving domestic violence that, quite frankly, have already been publicly known for years. None of this information about 50 Cent is new. These matters have been discussed, litigated, and debated long before the current situation involving Diddy reached this level. So the question becomes, why now? Why, at the exact moment when public attention is focused on Diddy and extremely serious allegations, is Ja Rule suddenly redirecting the conversation towards someone else? It gives the impression of an intentional distraction, whether that is the goal or not. And while it is fair to say that wrongdoing should be acknowledged whenever it exists, it is also fair to question motive and timing. When the house is on fire, pointing to a candle in another building does not help put out the flames. For those who have followed the developments surrounding Diddy closely, none of this feels sudden. Many people who have been paying attention since the Cassie lawsuit already knew the majority of what later appeared in documentaries and investigative reporting. The details may have been shocking to some viewers seeing them laid out all at once, but to others, this was confirmation of patterns that had been discussed quietly for years. That is why it feels disingenuous when certain individuals act as though this is all brand new information. It isn't. The difference now is that more people are listening and more people are willing to speak. That shift is significant, and it threatens anyone who may be connected to these events, directly or indirectly. Another layer to this is the resurfacing of Gene Deal's comments, where he described Ja Rule leaving a room early and making it known that disturbing activity was taking place inside. That detail matters because it suggests awareness. If someone recognizes that something inappropriate is happening and yet remains silent for years, only to later become an outspoken defender of the person at the center of those allegations, people are going to question whether guilt, fear, or obligation is involved. I am not making definitive claims here, but I am saying the optics are troubling. When you combine that with the intensity of Ja Rule's public messaging, it begins to look less like coincidence and more like damage control. There is also the possibility, one that many people are openly discussing now, that financial motivation plays a role. Ja Rule is not currently at the peak of his career. He is not selling out stadiums or dominating the charts the way he once did, and that reality matters when evaluating incentives. Diddy, on the other hand, has long been known for operating aggressively behind the scenes, using influence, leverage, and resources to protect himself. We have seen this pattern play out repeatedly over the years. So when people suggest that Ja Rule may be acting as a paid defender or informal spokesperson, it does not come from nowhere. It comes from observing behavior, timing, and history. What complicates this further is the fact that the conversation around Diddy has shifted dramatically. For years, certain allegations were dismissed as rumors or conspiracy theories. That is no longer the case. There are now multiple civil lawsuits from men describing serious sexual abuse, including allegations of assault, coercion, and confinement. These claims are detailed, consistent in certain patterns, and supported by sworn statements. That changes the entire framework of the discussion. This is no longer about gossip or speculation. It is about formal legal claims that carry weight and consequences. Given that reality, it becomes increasingly plausible that individuals within Diddy's orbit may have witnessed or participated in behavior they would rather not have examined publicly. This is why the focus on redirecting blame or attention toward others feels misplaced. Yes, wrongdoing by anyone should be addressed, but prioritization matters. When someone has allegedly wielded power for decades, intimidating, exploiting, and silencing people, that is where scrutiny belongs. Attempting to muddy the waters by reigniting old rivalries only serves to delay accountability. It does not absolve anyone else, but it does dilute the urgency of the moment. And for viewers who are paying attention, that tactic is transparent. I also want to pause here and acknowledge something important, especially for those watching these documentaries and discussions closely. This content is heavy. It is disturbing. It can have real emotional and physical effects, even on people who were not directly involved. We saw that recently with Aubrey, who ended up hospitalized after becoming physically ill while processing what she had watched. That is not something to dismiss lightly. Constant exposure to graphic, upsetting material can affect the nervous system, increase anxiety, and cause genuine health issues. This is a reminder that while it is important to stay informed, it is equally important to take care of yourself. Grounding activities, exercise, proper nutrition, rest, and stepping away from the screen when needed are not luxuries, they are necessities. Protecting your well-being does not mean ignoring the truth. It means giving yourself the strength to face it without harming yourself in the process. At one point, there was concern that Aubrey's hospitalization might be linked to retaliation or intimidation given Diddy's history and reputation. While that does not appear to be the case here, the fear itself is telling. It speaks to the level of intimidation people associate with this individual and the culture that has surrounded him for years. When people genuinely worry about consequences for speaking out, that alone should prompt serious reflection about power and accountability. As this conversation continues to unfold, more names, more stories, and more connections will inevitably surface. That is uncomfortable, but it is also necessary. Silence has protected too many people for too long. And while it may be tempting for some to deflect, distract, or rewrite history, the broader public is no longer as willing to look away. The focus right now should remain where it belongs, on the patterns of behavior, the abuse of power, and the systems that allowed it to continue unchecked. Everything else is noise. And that is why the actions and statements of people like Ja Rule are being examined so closely. When someone speaks loudly at the exact moment when quiet would benefit them most, people listen differently. Not because they want drama, but because they want truth. When you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, what becomes increasingly clear is that this situation is not just about individual personalities or old rivalries. It is about patterns of behavior that have been tolerated, excused, or deliberately ignored for decades. That is why it feels so strange to watch someone like Ja Rule suddenly take on the role of moral commentator at this exact moment. The industry has never lacked flawed individuals. That has never been the issue. The issue is power, scale, and the ability to silence others. Diddy did not operate like an ordinary artist or executive. He operated like someone who believed the rules did not apply to him, and for a very long time they didn't. This is why many people who already understood what was going on were not surprised by the documentary or by the lawsuits that followed. They may have been disturbed, but they were not shocked. They had heard the stories, seen the patterns, and noticed the fear around speaking openly. What shocked them more was how quickly certain people moved to defend, deflect, or distract once the spotlight intensified. That reaction alone tells you that there is more at stake than reputations. There are secrets, alliances, and unspoken agreements that people are desperate to keep buried. Ja Rule's behavior fits uncomfortably into this context. His sudden willingness to speak at length, to write extended posts, and to repeatedly reframe the narrative feels less like spontaneous outrage and more like strategic positioning. When someone keeps redirecting attention toward a known figure with known controversies, it raises the question of whether the goal is accountability or confusion. And confusion is powerful. Confusion slows momentum. Confusion allows time for stories to change and memories to blur. What also cannot be ignored is the way certain individuals seem to minimize the severity of the allegations against Diddy by placing them side by side with unrelated or lesser issues. This is not an accident. It is a classic tactic. When everything is framed as equally bad, nothing feels urgent. But not all wrongdoing carries the same weight. Not all abuse involves the same level of control, coercion, and long-term harm. When multiple men come forward with similar claims involving confinement, humiliation, and sexual assault, those claims demand focused attention. They cannot be brushed aside by pointing to someone else's past mistakes. Another element that deserves serious consideration is the environment these events allegedly took place in. The descriptions of private rooms, restricted access, and a culture where people were afraid to say no paint a picture of systematic abuse rather than isolated incidents. That matters because systems do not exist without multiple participants. Even if not everyone actively harmed others, silence and compliance allowed harm to continue. This is where questions of responsibility become uncomfortable. Being present, knowing something is wrong, and choosing not to intervene may not make someone the primary offender, but it does place them within the moral framework of the situation. This brings us back again to the comments attributed to Gene Deal and others who described people leaving rooms and acknowledging that disturbing things were happening inside. That acknowledgement is critical. It suggests awareness, not ignorance. And awareness, followed by years of silence, is something the public is no longer willing to accept without scrutiny. People want to know who knew what, and when. They want to understand why it took so long for the truth to surface. And they are paying attention to who is speaking now, and who is still avoiding the conversation entirely. There is also the matter of fear. Fear has always played a role in maintaining power structures like this. Fear of retaliation, fear of being blacklisted, fear of losing livelihoods. For many years, that fear worked. But fear loses its grip when people realize they are not alone. The lawsuits, the documentaries, and the testimonies have created a collective moment where silence is no longer the safer option. That shift is deeply threatening to anyone who benefited from the old system. It explains why certain voices are suddenly very loud, while others remain conspicuously quiet. Financial pressure is another reality that cannot be separated from this discussion. Careers rise and fall. Influence fades. When someone who once held a dominant position finds themselves on the margins, opportunities to regain relevance or secure financial stability can become tempting. Aligning with powerful figures, even controversial ones, can feel like a lifeline. That does not automatically make someone dishonest, but it does introduce incentives that deserve examination. When money, loyalty, and survival intersect, truth is often the first casualty. At the same time, it is important to recognize that not everyone involved in this story fits neatly into categories of hero or villain. Human behavior is complex. People make compromises. They rationalize. They convince themselves that what they saw was not as bad as it seemed. But complexity should not be used as an excuse for inaction. Understanding why people behaved a certain way does not mean excusing the harm that resulted from those choices. As the public conversation continues, more people are beginning to see how deeply ingrained this culture was. It was not just one person acting alone. It was an entire ecosystem that rewarded silence and punished dissent. Breaking that ecosystem requires sustained focus, not scattered outrage. That is why diversions are so damaging. Every time attention is pulled away from the central issue, momentum is lost. Survivors are forced to wait longer for acknowledgement, let alone justice. This is also why the emotional toll of engaging with this material cannot be overstated. Watching story after story of abuse, manipulation, and betrayal can leave people feeling drained, angry, or hopeless. For older viewers especially, this can be particularly heavy, as it challenges long-held beliefs about figures who were once admired. Processing that kind of disillusionment takes time. It is okay to step back, to pause, and to protect your mental and physical health while still caring about the truth. What matters most right now is clarity. Clarity about what is being alleged. Clarity about who holds power. And clarity about why certain narratives are being pushed at this specific moment. When you strip away the noise, the picture becomes simpler. This is about accountability for someone who wielded enormous influence and allegedly used it to harm others. Everything else is secondary. People are asking hard questions now, and they should be. Why are some individuals so eager to speak, while others remain silent? Why are old rivalries being resurrected instead of new truths being examined? Why does it feel like certain conversations are being steered rather than allowed to unfold naturally? These questions do not come from malice. They come from a desire to understand how something like this was allowed to happen for so long. As uncomfortable as it may be, the answers to those questions will likely implicate more than one person. That does not mean everyone is equally guilty, but it does mean that the era of plausible deniability is ending. The The public is no longer satisfied with vague statements or selective outrage. They want consistency. They want honesty. And most of all, they want the focus to remain on the people who were harmed, not on the egos of those arguing on the sidelines. This moment represents a turning point. Whether it leads to meaningful accountability or fades into another cycle of distraction depends on where attention is placed. If the conversation stays centered on truth rather than rivalry, on evidence rather than emotion, then something real may finally change. If not, the system that allowed this behavior to flourish will simply adapt and continue under a different name. And that is why every word spoken right now matters. Silence matters. Timing matters. Intent matters. The public is watching, listening, and remembering. As this situation continues to unfold, what becomes harder and harder to ignore is how deeply rooted this culture of silence really was. It did not exist because people did not know better. It existed because people convinced themselves that staying quiet was the safer option. For years, that calculation may have seemed rational. Speaking out meant risking careers, relationships, and personal safety. But time changes the equation. What once felt like protection now looks like complicity, and that shift in perception is powerful. The reason so many people are reacting so strongly now is not because the information is new, but because the environment has changed. People are no longer willing to accept carefully worded statements or selective outrage. They want consistency. They want to know why certain individuals are being shielded while others are being dragged into the spotlight as distractions. And they want to understand how someone could allegedly operate with such impunity for so long without more resistance from those around them. This is where accountability becomes uncomfortable, because it does not stop with one name. While Diddy remains the central figure in these allegations, the surrounding cast matters too. Not because everyone is equally responsible, but because systems survive through participation. Some people actively harm, others enable, others look away, and some convince themselves that what they are witnessing is none of their business. But when harm is occurring on that scale, indifference becomes a form of involvement. That is why the focus on who is speaking now and how they are speaking is so important. When someone chooses this moment to dominate the conversation with lengthy defenses, diversions, or moral lectures aimed elsewhere, it raises legitimate questions. It is not unreasonable to ask why these conversations did not happen years ago. It is not unfair to wonder why energy is being spent attacking old rivals instead of addressing the present crisis. These questions are not attacks. They are part of a necessary reckoning. The public is also becoming more aware of how narratives are shaped. Fame has a way of distorting reality. When powerful figures control platforms, resources, and access, they can influence what gets amplified and what gets buried. For a long time, that influence worked. Stories were dismissed. Victims were discredited. Whispers were laughed off as rumors. But that control weakens when multiple voices begin telling similar stories, independently and under legal oath. At that point, dismissal becomes denial. It is also important to recognize how emotionally exhausting this process is, especially for those who have followed these figures for decades. Many viewers grew up with this music, these personalities, and these cultural moments. Reconciling admiration with allegations of harm is deeply unsettling. It forces people to confront the idea that success and talent do not equal morality. That realization can feel like a loss, and grief is a natural response to it. That is why taking care of yourself while engaging with this material is not optional. There is no benefit in consuming distressing content endlessly without balance. Staying informed should not come at the cost of your health. Stepping away, grounding yourself, and focusing on positive routines is not avoidance. It is resilience. If you want to continue paying attention to these conversations, you need the strength to do so clearly and calmly. As for the industry itself, this moment will likely define what comes next. Either it will continue doing what it has always done, closing ranks and waiting for public attention to move on, or it will finally begin to confront the systems that allowed abuse to flourish. Real change requires more than statements. It requires transparency, consequences, and a willingness to listen to those who were harmed without immediately questioning their motives. The legal process will play a role here, but it will not answer every question. Courts determine guilt or liability, not moral responsibility. Even if some allegations never result in convictions, the patterns they reveal still matter. They tell a story about power, access, and silence. And that story deserves to be examined honestly, without distraction. This is why attempts to redirect attention feel so frustrating to so many people. When someone allegedly wielded power like a weapon, the conversation should remain focused on that reality until it is fully addressed. Bringing up unrelated conflicts or past grievances may generate clicks, but it does nothing to move the conversation forward. In fact, it risks re-traumatizing those who have already waited too long to be heard. What gives this moment weight is the sheer number of people who are now paying attention. Viewers are connecting dots. They are remembering old interviews, old comments, and old moments that felt strange at the time but make more sense now. Collective memory is a powerful thing. Once people begin to see patterns, it becomes much harder to erase them. That does not mean every accusation should be accepted without question. Fairness matters. Evidence matters. But fairness cuts both ways. Dismissing claims simply because they are uncomfortable or inconvenient is not fairness. It is avoidance. And avoidance is exactly what allowed this situation to grow unchecked in the first place. As uncomfortable as it is, the truth tends to surface eventually. It may take years. It may come in fragments. But once it begins to emerge, it rarely stops. That is why this moment feels different. There is a sense that something irreversible has started. People are no longer satisfied with half answers. They are no longer impressed by loyalty performances or carefully curated outrage. They want substance. At the center of all of this are the people who were harmed. Their stories should not be reduced to talking points or used as tools in someone else's feud. They deserve to be heard on their own terms, without being drowned out by louder voices with their own agendas. Keeping that perspective is essential if this conversation is going to lead anywhere meaningful. So as we move forward, the question is not just what will happen legally, but what will change culturally. Will people continue to excuse behavior because of fame and influence, or will there finally be a shift toward accountability that does not depend on public pressure alone? Will those who knew speak honestly, or will silence once again be chosen as the safer option? These are not questions for one person to answer. They are questions for an entire industry and the audience that supports it. Change does not happen in isolation. It happens when enough people decide that looking away is no longer acceptable. For now, the most important thing is to stay focused, stay grounded, and stay honest about what is being revealed. Do not let distractions pull attention away from the central issue. Do not let old rivalries cloud present realities. And do not let the weight of this conversation overwhelm you to the point where you lose clarity. If you have made it this far, I appreciate you taking the time to listen and think through this with me. These are not easy topics, but they are necessary ones. If you have thoughts, perspectives, or questions, feel free to share them respectfully. And if you find value in these discussions, consider supporting the channel, engaging with the content, and continuing to stay informed. Take care of yourselves, look out for one another, and I will see you soon in the next conversation.